Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Dimitra Theophanis, and this is Fired Up, the Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass Education series on all things about glass. And this first Friday of each month is always open to the public, but we do also have virtual programming every Friday of the month. So if you like today's program and would like to join in more of it with us, please visit aacgglass.org to join, and you can be a part of all of our programming throughout the month. We have a pretty interesting one coming up soon that's going to be a panel with Susie Silbert and David Hutchhausen, Sheila Strobel from Vetri Gallery, a number of other people, and I think it'll be really exciting for all of you to join. All right, without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce today's guest, Kari Russell-Pool, someone that I just have had so much admiration for since I started in glass. She was definitely one of the people that I looked up to. And so it's really phenomenal to have her on the program today and to hear more about her practice, her concepts, her narratives that really make her art so meaningful. So Kari, please go ahead and share your screen and get started.
Share screen. Are you seeing my screen?
We are, yeah. So you just need to hit play. Yep, there you go. Perfect.
I want to thank everybody, particularly the Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass. I really appreciate the time and everybody taking their time to listen. My name is Kari Russell-Pool, and this is I'm going to talk a lot about the work, but my website is a good resource for you to visit and learn more about the work and how to contact me. I come from, as well, I'm a lamp worker, but I come from a hot glass background. And one of the things I like to show the work kind of the way I see it and live with it. So I'm using blown glass and flamework glass, and some of my flamework glass is rather opaque, and it's almost like glass mixed media. So the blown pieces are a little translucent, the flowers might be fairly opaque, and the stems might be transparent. So much like a plant, you would want to just sort of put it in indirect light. And sometimes you see my work in gallery lighting, which doesn't always present it in the way that I'm used to seeing it presented. So I don't know why this is not allowing me to advance my slides. Does anybody have any idea on that?
Harry, sometimes the buttons are kind of on the lower portion of your screen.
I've got it in play mode, so it's not.
Can you try your arrow keys, Kari, see if that works?
No, I am using my arrow keys, and it's not allowing me to do that. So I guess we're going to go into presenter view for this. But I share a studio with my husband, Mark Petrovic, who's also a phenomenal glass artist, and I invite you to visit his website and learn more about his work. But one of the important things to know about him is he makes these delightful little birds that you see. And sometimes we do full-on collaborations, but mostly we do things that he calls the yes dear collaborations, where I'll say, can you make me a bird and whatever, and he says yes dear, and he's not particularly invested in them as his work, as he's just helping me out, but he would very much like you to know that he makes those pieces. So like I said, I'm a flame worker, and flame working basically means that I manipulate glass rods and a torch. So here's a picture of my bench. I can actually see into the flame when I'm working because I wear safety glasses that filter out the soda flare, which is that orange that you see, or that yellow. And here's me 10 years later and 20 pounds later, building a form. So if I'm building a form, I'm using a hand torch and bringing that hand torch to the piece. And here's me last week putting some leaves on a sunflower bowl in my current studio. And one of the important things I want to bring your attention to is the little tube in the lower right of that photo, and that's my ventilation. And it's really important when you're flame working to have good ventilation, particularly for me, because I'm using color, and it when you heat it up, it gives off a lot of nasty chemicals. So Mark pulls the cane for me, One of the things with flame workers is generally you have to purchase your glass, and the glass that's available is a single density of color. So it would be like if you were getting blue, it would be, you'd cut a cross section, it would be blue all the way through. But because Mark's pulling the rods for me, he's gathering clear glass, rolling through glass powders, gathering again, and pulls them to 40-foot lengths, which I cut up and store. And that allows me control over my palette, so I can mix opaque and transparent colors. It's fairly translucent, so it's not a single density. If you did a cross section, you'd see the clear on the inside. And then when I'm making my flamework elements, I can get a really different effect when I pull a yellow cane and roll through pink powder, as opposed to an orange cane and rolling through pink powder, or blue cane and rolling through pink powder. So I have a lot of control over my palette. And these are just some examples of the colors that I roll through. I share my studio with my husband and my dog, Hank. And then I also have, or we have, 2 grown children, and they're out of the nest now. And I don't take for granted just one moment that I've had the pleasure of getting to meet them as adult grown people who are fully formed and wonderful human beings. And it's just super delicious to be on this side of parenthood. So I'm going to show you some early work. This is an example of what I was doing when I was in high school. So this isn't the best example of what I was doing, but I have this painting, and this is one of the things I used to get into art school. And I'm going to give you a lot of words about why I make stuff, but when I pulled this painting out of a portfolio, I had the realization that I've pretty much been making the same piece my entire life. So at that time, I was looking at a lot of Cezanne paintings, and I was setting up still lives with reflective stainless steel bowls and striped cloth and fruit. And then I was drawing those lines and that fruit in those forms of the bowls. And so I really, I will tell you a lot of words, but I have been making the same thing forever. But at the time when I learned to lamp work, I was in school. It was a 5-year BFA degree at that time. And I was in my 4th year, and I was making a lot of castings, and I was casting these figures and the fence, and then reinvesting them and doing succession castings. And I had a teacher, Brent Marshall, who suggested I learn how to lamp work, and that might save some time in that process. So I took myself out to Pilchuck Glass School and took a class with Ginny Ruffner and learned how to lamp work. And this is the first lamp work piece I ever made. And this bed just kind of crops up again in my work. But this was borosilicate. And the thing about borosilicate at the time, and really for a long time after, was that if you wanted color, it had to be a surface application after the fact. And the reason that I was drawn to glass in the first place was the idea that you can work through form and color simultaneously. So this is an early piece where I'm making a blown object, and I'm attaching the bits in the hot shop before it's put away, making the carrots with the stems, and then I'm finishing the piece later outside of the hot shop with my torch. So I'm going to show you some early stuff that I've digitized. This is an early beehive, bits all over it, so that I'm attaching these things after the fact outside of the hot shop. This is a hillside it had little clear bits on it, and then I'd lamp work these curtains of grass and then attach those curtains of grass onto the hill. Here's an example of studio lighting doing a really good job and favor to this piece, because I love the shadow in this, but this is an early bed. This is feather bed. And so this is my thesis work. And here's me starting to think about the fact that I have to get my work out of the studio and someplace else. So again, revisiting the bed, but taking the grass and putting it in some florist foam. And early examples of my ability to blow glass, which isn't great. And you can see the goopy thing at the top. But this is one of the first forays where I'm really thinking about creating interior spaces. So there's a window cut into the beehive, and then 3 groups of bees that are fused together, and those hang on bits that are off on the side of the piece. And here you can see when I have Mark gaffing them, how much more controlled the form is. And again, I'm always thinking about how to get the work from my studio somewhere else. And so this little bed comes out of the piece, so it can be shipped separately or boxed separately for shipping. And those bees are hanging on the thing. And then I'm just going to take you through some early work. And I love this because you can see the development of Mark's birds as well. After we both graduated from school, we moved to, we were Penland adjacent in North Carolina. We were renting a house in a studio, and we had fruit trees and they were in abundance. And I did a series based on coronation orbs. And again, I'm thinking about how you get it from one place to another. So on the bottom of the on the orb, there's little pins that are lamp worked on there so that the piece comes apart and ships in two pieces, and you can put packing on the inside of it. Here's that bed being revisited again with the stars and the bird. And it's a good example of the different densities of glass that I was talking about. You've got a really transparent bed, and then the stars are a little translucent, the bird's pretty opaque, the flowers are pretty opaque. And so it just, you know, you have to be sensitive with your lighting so that you can take in the whole piece. I also worked on a series of House of Cards pieces that were sort of tongue-in-cheek about how the fragility of my work. And I tend to be I don't know that I would call myself a nervous person. I guess now you would call it anxious. And but I'm one of those worst case scenario people who games out a lot of stuff. So I did a whole series of work that I thought of as chicken self-portraits. And here's a couple of those that Mark gaffed for me. So the chickens are done hot and has the trunk and the branches of the tree started. And then I finished the piece off outside of the hot shop. And then another piece, this is kind of in later 10 years into the career. This is called Ascension, but it's one of those pieces. I made a lot of these pieces. At first, I was looking at celestial things, and then I started adding a lot of beds and ladders into them. And they're sort of like reliquaries to me. So it's a nice little space that I think of it as inviting someone into that space. And I do get a lot of questions about how I ship my work. So I use something called polyfill. I prefer the polyester, and it's a loose batting fluffing, and I stuff it densely within the piece so that if anything breaks on the outside, it's not catastrophic. And then this would go in a foam lined box. And a lot of you will remember there's a man named Richard Woody, who, you know, really I owe the ability to have a career in the beginning, because he would do the glass gallery circuit. And so I had a affordable and safe way to send my work to the glass galleries, and then he could deliver them to the collectors. And here's a later piece along that same series with a little cradle in there. And so a lot of, you know, beds can be so many things. They can be fertile, they can be love, they can be children, they can be just sheer exhaustion. It's just a symbol that I use a lot in my work. And then while I'm making these pieces that are a little more thoughtful and narrative, and I'm weaving some threads of a narrative together, I also like to work on series of objects. And that allows me to just kind of, when I don't know what I'm doing, get in the studio and get my hands busy. So I know I'll need to make a ton of leaves or a ton of flowers or a ton of fruit. So I'm going to take you some of those series of objects that I make. Again, this is very much inspired by our fruit trees. This is a dancing peach bottle. Here's a dancing pear bottle. And here's a carrot bottle. This is a bowl. This is a later one that I still have. This one's probably about 14 inches tall. They were, generally my bowls are smaller than that. And the original idea of the carrot bowl was very much, there's a painting by Gauguin, I think it is, where the men are holding hands and they're all dancing in a circle. And I was really trying to get that idea of that movement within the piece. And I love making bowls. My work tends to be very controlled, and I'm I'm bending to a pattern and I've really thought out the form. But when I make bowls, I'm just sort of free building it with my torch. And so it allows me a little bit of play. They tend to be smaller, and it's a way for me to try out different color. It's, allows me to make something that's really easily shippable. And so I'm showing you some more recent examples of these bowls. And it allows me to try out new color patterns and color schemes in a kind of a lower stakes sort of way. And then as I became to be more of a gardener, I tend to be like a shrubbery gardener dotted with perennials. I started to get a better appreciation for the balance and using different textures, and that worked its way into my work as well. And here you can see that in an example of this basket. But why objects? This is a picture of a teacup from my grandmother's teacup collection. And I can remember being a small child and being allowed to drink out of this teacup, and then just feeling so special being able to touch this delicate thing and be entrusted with it. And I think we all have extraordinary objects, they're either ceremonial, but sometimes like we also have a can that was my husband's grandmother's that she kept buttons in, but now we keep our dog treats in it. And so if you came to our house, our dog would take you to the can. And so every time we open the can, we are thinking about her. And sometimes those people are no longer in our lives, but those objects really, they have that meaning for us. And and I think they're just extraordinary vessels for our stories. And so that teacup inspired a group of teapots, but I really held off for a long time making a teapot because I felt like I didn't have a good understanding of the handle and how that would all work, because, they're, it had to be right. So this is an example of an early teapot with Mark making the bird for me. And I've continued throughout my career in making these. I didn't realize that teapots were something that people collected. And so they became in great demand, and I've made a lot of teapots over the years. This is a little jeweled teapot. This is a fairly recent one this is a Yes Dear collaborative with Mark. This is another Yes Dear collaborative, and also a little bit collaboration with my oven, because I have to be very careful with my oven so that it doesn't get too hot. And this is a good point to say that, because I'm finishing these pieces outside of the hot shop, that does not mean that these are not re-annealed again and again and again. And I'm going to take you through how I work in a little bit. But basically, I'm building these forms, and then I'm taking them and I'm putting them in a cold oven and then bringing that up to anneal and then giving it some time to soak and then cool down. So they get annealed several times during the making. This is a tiny little teapot. And this one is called Pour Me Out. I just participated in a show at the Blue Spiral Gallery in North Carolina. So we had a couple teapots in that show. So I'm going to take you through how I build the work, and I'm going to draw your attention to the form that's drawn in red. And anywhere that you see a line that goes across, because this piece is going to be made in the round, that will be a circle. So then I'll draw out those circles as well. And I use like a 1/4 inch piece of plate glass on a table that's next to me. And I heat my glass a little bit at a time, and I'm checking it against my pattern. And I'm not doing it like some people you'll see using borosilicate, where they're like doing the whole thing. It's just a series of straight line bends. And then sometimes I will make these really long canes that I call dot dash canes. And what I'm doing is I'm taking a yellow cane and a green cane, I'm cutting them up into little pieces, and I'm fusing it again piece by piece into a long cane. And then that long cane I will then bend into my circles. Here's an example of lemons that Mark made for me for this piece. They're made in the hot shop, but the bits are attached before they're put away. And then the punties get cleaned up, and I will never touch my torch to those fruit. I'm only working on the stems. to build those into my piece. I've got a couple pieces courtesy of the Fantastic Human and TA Marshall Hyde from my class at Pilchuck that you can see here. I'm making some petal stock. So I'm melting a blob of glass, rolling through powder, squashing it flat and pulling it out into this rod. And that's my petal stock. And then I go and you can see where that little teardrop is. I'm just pulling every single petal out of that stock that I make. I don't have a good idea of how long it takes me to make something. One, because I don't really want to know. And another, because I work on several pieces at a time. But generally, if I'm making like a substantial piece, I'm spend a day making petal stock, and then I spend a whole day making my flowers. Here's me making one with a much bigger stem than I do in my own work, but this was for a demo and we were just using the flowers. We weren't putting them back into another piece. But I'm building it all together, all those petals, and then when that flower is finished, it goes into an annealer to be annealed. Here's me rocking all the safety equipment here, making this flower. And so you can see I've got the whole thing. Then that goes in the oven. And then I store all my flowers. I use florist foam, and my pieces really generally have thin stems, and I'll get all those parts. And then my leaves, each leaf is made, melt some glass, squash, and then put it away. And then I'll use those last. And here I've bent all my profile and I bend all my circles, and then I bend the profile of the piece, and I don't use forms or anything. I got kind of a janky little system that I use to eyeball it and get everything straight. I'm always checking in the round. And so once I've got it like this, then I'll put that in the oven, in a cold oven, bring it up to anneal, and get the stress out of it. And then I'm starting again, because again, I've got cold glass and I'm just taking my hot torch to it. Then I'll get that in a quadrant here. And then I'm adding in the lemons, checking the other side. And then the last thing that I'm going to do is add the flowers and the leaves to the piece. And here it is finished. And then I'm going to jump ahead to 1990, and I'm pregnant with our second child. And I had a dream about this series of work. I call it the Banded Vessels. And to me, it really feels very much like being pregnant. So I'm working with a gaffer, and they're blowing the blank for me, cutting it in half and inserting the blown piece or the flame worked piece in this inside. This is another Yes Dear collaborative with Mark. Sometimes he would make the blanks for me, but I was working kind of large in a lot of these, and I would work with other gaffers. Here's a more recent commission that I was working on. That's Adam Holtzinger and Susan Sparanovich helping Mark. This isn't our studio. It was, we needed to rent a studio that had a larger glory hole to make this piece, but it's blown in one piece. Here it is. Here's me holding the blank. And then it gets marked at its thickest spot and scored. And then while you spin it on the Lazy Susan, you hit it with a very sharp flame and it pops apart. So here's it popped apart. And then I'll use that to pattern what I need to bend for my circles. I'll bend my circles. And again, I'm not using forms. I'm using right angles and checking it from all views to make sure that it's upright. I'll get some sort of idea of how I want it to be. And then here's the piece finished with the lampwork insert glued into it. Here's another piece from that series, kind of playing with that idea of the garden, adding the different textures, and a very recent one of that Banded Vessel where I'm revisiting it, but I'm using a different color on the inside of the vase as opposed to the outside of the vase. So I'm playing with the idea that I am opening it up, and I can really play with the color. So that little girl grew up enough to go to elementary school, or not elementary school, nursery school. And she brought these home talking about how we like to sleep. And those came home on a Friday, and on a Monday, our whole family was diagnosed with mono, and everybody got better except for me. I just had a lot of stuff that seemed to be going on, and I was exhausted all the time, and I didn't feel like a good enough mother and a good enough wife and a good enough daughter, and my galleries were clamoring for more work. And it was around the same time that I got asked to do a keynote, and I was preparing all my stuff. And so I was able to see that even though I felt like a failure, I'd still had when I looked in the rearview mirror, there was a lot that I had accomplished. And at the same time, I heard a spot on NPR where they were talking about a person that owned a trophy shop. And he said he could always tell when somebody was making a trophy or ordering one for themselves. And I thought, well, that's it. I'm going to make myself a series of trophies, and mine are going to be about color and form. And I threw a lot of teapots in there because I had become a little bit known for the teapots. And I was going for, in these pieces, sort of that kind of color. You could almost smell the color. I wanted, you get that ache of sweetness in your tooth when you looked at these. And similar to the banded vessels, there were just flame worked elements that were then all glued together to form these pieces. And then then I did a series with just the hot glass stem. So the stem is done in the hot chop, and then the rest of the piece is done in a torch. Here's a recent example. I found a lemon stem and made this piece. Is called Balance. And this one is Cinnamon Peach. A lot of them had food names. And I wanted you just to be able to smell, kind of taste these pieces. Here's a nice piece that if you visit the Flint Institute of Art, you can see this piece on display. And then we're gonna, when Mark and I were married, my aunt made us a sampler. And I was always intrigued with the idea that the alphabet was something that evolved over time. So this one doesn't have any J's in it. And she had explained about the alphabet. And then I got to thinking about what we learned about the Underground Railroad. It may or may not be true, but I was thinking about the idea that people hung quilts to send secret messages. And so these pieces take place in 2000 to 2008. And I was feeling sort of an existential threat from the George W. Bush administration. And for those of you that might be too young to remember, people would call George W. Bush W to distinguish him from his father. And so this is my Safety Mom series. So this piece is called Utopia. It's really about us being removed from the Kyoto Protocol, which was an international cap on greenhouse emissions. And we'd been part of it, and he removed us from participating in that cap. And then there was the war on terror and the idea of performative security. So these pieces had skeleton keys, and the homes were made from skeleton keys. And here's a detail of me leaving out. So basically I just left out my W in my alphabets during this time. And you can see that shadow plays in here. So these are flamework elements that are affixed to plate glass, but it's also just elevated off a painted background a little bit. So you get a little bit of shadow. This one is called Our House. And I just love making text in glass. It's just a very satisfying thing. Bush had run on the idea that he would renew the assault weapons ban. And then when he got in office, decided not to do that. This piece is called Bleeding Heart. And here's another gun piece called Peacemaker, which is another name for a revolver. So it's a prickly way to live, making kind of work that's a little bit protest-based. And Mark's over in the corner, and he's making all these distilled life pieces with these little families of birds and all of that stuff. And it just seems like a nicer way to live. And so I kind of switched away from that into these more relationship pieces. This one is particularly inspired by my youngest child. We had taken her to a baseball game, and she was angry that I wouldn't buy her a bottle of water. And we were leaving, and she was afraid to get lost. So holding onto my hand as tightly as she could, yet still trying to step on every crack on the sidewalk. And I enjoyed being able to put these flowers in that density of the heart, because I can't put things that densely when I'm making them in the torch. And I went to a friend's home, and he showed me an object that his father-in-law had made, he and his wife, when they got married, and it was based on a sailor's valentine. And theirs was made with acorn caps and all sorts of natural items. And I didn't know about sailor's valentines, and I was really intrigued. And so I decided to make a series of gardener's valentines. So here's an early one. And I also have this little object that I keep in a drawer in my studio, and it's tiny, and it has these little bumps. So it feels really good to hold it in your hand. And I would always wonder about these people, JJ and MW, and why I had this object. And the best I can understand, it's a tear catcher. And that is the hill I'm going to die on, because I love that metaphor for a relationship. But at the same time that I'm thinking about this object, some of my work is showing up on the secondary market. And so I started to think, like, well, how do you make an object that's an heirloom in real time? And so I think of these as vessels for someone else's story, kind of like the Velveteen Rabbit. It gets loved into existence. So I make this piece, but it doesn't have a story until somebody else fills it with their story, and you hope it's going to be a happy story. Here's an example of a piece with its semi in the round. And then my last piece that I made in this series, I call my Funny Valentine. And then we're going to jump to 2008. A lot of this stuff that I'm showing you isn't exactly linear, but these pieces were from 2008. And Mark and I had benefited from hitting the glass scene at the tail end of a recession. So we were new and young, and our work was inexpensive. But in 2008, we weren't as young, and our work wasn't cheap. And we had 2 kids in a house, and all the, as my daughter said, when she first realized what we did, she said, let me get this straight. You make things and hope they sell, and that's how we get our money. So I did the series. I think of it as juggling the lemons, and it's kind of that making lemonade from the lemons. And I wanted to capture that idea of them all being in the air, all like, as long as nothing fell, we'd all be okay. And I was hoping that you could, again, it was sort of like that you could almost smell these pieces. And here you saw that piece being made. This one is called Tonic. And I got an incredible opportunity in, I think it was 2010, to go out to the Tacoma Museum of Glass for a residency there. And so I had a year to prepare. I knew I was going. I, was playing with some different forms. I thought it would be a nice way, because I have to work with a gaffer to get some forms made. And the thing that largely came out of that residency was that in Tacoma, they have the Dahlia trial gardens, and I got to see them. And I've never been particularly interested in, like, capturing a flower completely the way it is in real life. I just kind of want the impression of a flower. I want it to feel alive. But the thing about dahlias is that they look fake anyway. And so it also allowed me a way with making these with the bigger flowers and the smaller flowers to kind of capture that same feeling I get when I'm adding in the fruit or Mark's birds. There's a nice variation within the pieces. And I think these pieces sort of invite you, even though you probably shouldn't, to touch them. Like, you can tell that the flowers are spiky, and you want to feel how they feel against the palm of your hand. It can be difficult working with gaffers because, I'm specific about my forms. The pieces take a long time to make. So I love this kind of slouchy cylindrical form. It can be hard to get a gaffer to make you a slouchy cylinder. They really want to, they know how to blow. And so that's the one thing that's very frustrating to me working having to work and collaborate with other people blowing the work for me. And here's another example of that piece. But, you know, it was a year to plan to go out to Tacoma, and Mark was teaching at Penland before, and we were going to not see each other. He was going to get home 2 days after I'd left for Tacoma, and then I was teaching at Pilchuck right after. So I was going to be away for like a good month. And to get out of the house, I had to, you know, I had backup plans on backup plans. I had 2 dogs and 2 kids, and the husband was going to be away when I left. And so how was I going to manage all that? So I started thinking about evacuation routes. This is, and, you know, I had redundancy built into every one of my plans. And it seemed like my husband, when he needed to leave, it was like, you know, straight out the door. And so I was kind of playing with that dichotomy and working through all of these ideas. And now we're in 2012, and I'm working on this piece when the Sandy Hook massacre happens. And I got to say, it just felt like a really icky time to be making work about, you know, wanting to get away from your family. But I still kind of had all those feelings. And it put me on my heels for a little bit. And then that kind of morphed itself into this series that I call the Compassionate Cages. And these really don't have any ability to incarcerate. They're just kind of a nice place, but that idea of safety. And I would also kind of tongue in cheek say it's about the particular pain of parenting teenagers, because I've mentioned that I am an anxious person, or like a worst case scenario person. And you have teenagers that have to make their own mistakes and experience their own things, but you think of all the things that you did that were stupid beyond measure, and by the grace of God, no one got hurt and everybody was fine. And so it just, I found it a difficult phase, even though I have great, fabulous kids. But so I worked it out through these compassionate cages. And then I started drawing some boundaries with my extended family, and that led to this series of coloring book cages. And these, I think of this as a self-portrait, but it's rendered very flat and ready to be colored in. And as I generally do, I'm working on a couple pieces at once. And so for these pieces, the piece in the middle here, I was taking photographs as I was making it. And it was a Friday, and I had a couple pieces, and I threw it in my oven to anneal. I came in on Sunday, and my oven was 2000 degrees. And Monday, when it cooled down, I had a glazed kiln shelf. But it allowed me the opportunity to kind of look at what I liked about those drawings and rebuild this. And so this became metaphorical me. And instead of the bird being drawn flat, it's rendered in shallow relief. But most importantly to me, it's into the framework of the house. So I think of this as like the foundation of motherhood, and very spare, and I do love it. And we, around that time after that was made, we made a big move out to Cleveland, and I didn't have ventilation for a while. So I focused on making these cages because that was safe for me to do. I couldn't use color. And I think of this as motherhood, where your experience is sort of echoed across different homes, but each experience is unique, and parenting casts a long shadow on us. So this piece is called Grace, and this is an installation. And during that time that I wasn't making color, you can go to my website and investigate that yourself, but you'll go up and you'll see where the series is. You'll click on perspective, and that will take you to this group of works on paper that I did during that time. And then I got my ventilation back. And so this is, and then I also was able to take a class with Cappy Thompson and Dick Weiss and learn about using enamels in the work. And here the bird, Mark is generous with his time and his talents and letting me use birds, but there's something about being able to do the work yourself, which is extremely gratifying. And here I'm using bullseye sheet glass which is not compatible, and I cannot fuse it with the glass that I am using. But I'm trying to thoughtfully suspend these birds in these pieces. And I'm working front and back so the piece can be seen in all views. This piece is called A Moment Alone. And then, so I'm working on this, and then we jump to, I think we're at 2018, 2019, and we're approaching our 28th wedding anniversary. And Mark asked me to look up what the traditional gift for 28 is. And when I look it up, it says that it's nothing special. And so we had a little giggle. And then I twisted his arm to work on this series of loving cups with me. And a loving cup is a trophy with two handles. And, you know, we work together in the studio side by side, and we're always working, and we change our work a lot, but we don't play the way we did when we were students, where it's like, hey, there's a bench open, let's play, you know. It tends to be more work. So the idea was that we would approach these the way we were when we were in school, and the forms are very much based on metal trophies, and stems are done in the hot shop. They are glued together because I am the lone assistant on these. And we thought we might do 28 of them, but then we remembered that we decided that we probably shouldn't work together in the hot shop so that we could stay married. And we'd made that decision, like, you know, 20 years before, and it had been a good one. But we finished the work out and presented it as a show in January of 2020. And then the world kind of shut down after. So it was really lovely that we, you know, learned how to work together in the studio, in the hot shop during that time, because Mark was pretty busy and I was his assistant, and we had to make it work. But I got to we both sort of took a glass sabbatical during that time. And I started working on thinking of that idea of how you make an heirloom in real time again. So this was my COVID time capsule book. So it's all embroidered, and it started to be about COVID, but also the shift in society. And it was a way to kind of document and learn something new. And it was super fun, you know, super fun and super creative to work on something else and to learn how to do it. And each between the pages, there's a little pocket so I can put sort of things. And it's just it's a wonderful, you know, I'm not sure who I'm telling this all to, but it was really fun to make this book, and really creatively refreshing for me. And in July of 2019, Mark had purchased this boat that was just supposed to be buffed and then refinished, but there had been an oil leak, and the boat needed to be rebuilt from the bottom up. And so he spent the last 3 years working on this, and we are hoping to get this boat in the water this summer. So we've been working pretty hard on that. And kind of that idea of like, we don't know how long we're going to be able to, our bodies will hold out for glass, but it's really refreshing to find that we can find creative outlets doing other things and skill building. And so that's been a really fun part of this transition for us. But I'm back in the studio, and I made some of the objects that you've already seen during that time. But again, I'm revisiting these spaces and playing with that bed again. And I think I see these pieces now. They're not necessarily cages. They're not completely the reliquaries, but they're sort of in between those two. And here I am playing with the enamel as well and adding that in. And then again, on the right, you see the detail of the back of the piece, and then adding a little pattern in. These very much feel like empty nesting pieces where I am. This is called Lucky Yellow, where you know, if it's autobiographical, I'm sitting very happily within this space, which I hope you find inviting, but also you see is pretty well filled. So that is all that I have to share with you.
Thank you so much, Kari. That was incredible. And I guess before I get to the questions, I just want to give you a chance to let people know where they can find your work, if they should contact you directly, or what they should do.
Yeah, you know what? There's a contact button on my website, so you are more than welcome to contact me. And if you've seen my work or you work with a gallery, then that's fine. Or, I will put you in touch, or we could work it out. But there's, my website is very informative and a way to get in touch with me as well.
Okay, great. So someone wants to know what COE you work with primarily.
I have no idea. I use spruce pine batch. It's a furnace.
Okay.
But, so I'm using furnace glass.
Okay. Let's see here. Can you talk a little about the term bowl? Do you ever imagine or know of your bowls functioning as a container, or do you mean them as a reference to the form only?
It's a reference to the form only. I call them wish bowls because people were very much on, like when I first started making them, they were like, well, it's a bowl. Well, what can you put in it? And so we would say wishes. So it's a wish bowl. I mean, it is kind of like a little sculptural form. It
Yeah.
just references a bowl.
And someone is asking if the frames in your Valentine series are also glass.
No, those are wood.
And what is the glue that you use?
We use Hextol, which is it's pretty industry standard. It has the same, if a piece were to break, it would break on the glass and not the glue.
And what type of hand torch are you using?
So I use a Bethlehem hand torch, which I don't believe they make any longer. Unfortunately, my hand torch was damaged traveling to do a demo, and I sent it back to Bethlehem to repair, and they gave me the sad news that they don't make it again anymore, but they did another run of them so that I could still have a torch, which I am forever grateful to the Bethlehem people for doing that. And it's a brilliant design for being able to get inside of work. I just adore it. And it's a surface mix. For my work, I really need a surface mix torch because I'm using color. So I need torches have either the gas and the oxygen mixes before the flame or at the flame. And if it mixes at the flame, it is a more oxygen rich flame, which allows me to keep my color truer. So for me, it is very important to have a surface mix torch.
Let's see. There was one more I was about to ask. You are now, it seems, an empty nester. If so, how has that changed or impacted the way your home environment has informed your work?
So I am an empty nester. It seemed like we were empty nesters when our youngest went to college, and then the pandemic happened. And then, so that was a really weird thing to have. Mark and I are both very COVID conscious, and to live with a younger person who might not be so much. So that was a weird thing to have somebody kind of have to live in your space again. It's been fairly recent, so I don't, I'm not really sure right now. I gotta say, we're in the midst of we call our kids the pancakes. The second pancake is moving states and had her vehicle stolen last week and totaled. So that it feels like, even though she's now out of the nest, there's a lot of support that's going on necessarily and happily right now, but it feels very much like it's all hands on deck. So I will have a better answer for that next year.
Let's see. What are your favorite birds to sculpt? Are you inspired by the birds you see around where you live?
So once again, I would say that the blown birds that you see in my work, Mark is making those. And if I'm making them and doing them, then I'm going to enamel them and cut them out. I am mostly, or when I'm making them in my black and white pieces, I am just looking for a picture of a bird that I like the way it's standing, or the silhouette, or the way that I can change that what I'm seeing as a picture into a compelling line drawing. So I'm not particularly concerned with making an exact bird. And a lot of times I'll play with scale if I'm just doing a drawing. So, I might be making a bird that's very big that's actually small. So I don't, it really is just about finding a compelling image that I can work with.
We also have some comments about how lifelike your fruits are. Is there anything you can speak to other than talent that helps to give that sort of, can just bite into it kind of look?
Yeah, so, that's the thing that I think people don't see about the work. Like, you see what we present to you, you don't see the weeks or months of research that goes into like trying all the different colors out, or, like, do you want it, like if you're making a peach, do you want it to be fuzzy? Like, you can put the powder on so it's not melted all the way in. Will that look fuzzy or will it look dusty? Or how do you do it? It's really just about like an accumulation of knowledge about how color works. And, like those lemons, they might be, they're a little dimply, but that takes like having to understand like how much powder to put on so that as it melts in, it might, leave some dimples, and then, make sure you back off on the heat so that it stays. So there's just a lot of really understanding your material that goes into that. And we make so much that you never see or that gets thrown away, or, it's not like, hey, I'm going to make a lemon and it's going to be perfect. There's just a lot of research and development that goes into the work.
You also spoke about the point in your life where your family all got mono and how you didn't recover from that as quickly. So it seemed to take more of a personal toll. Do you feel that your art helped to get through that time, or was it a matter of kind of trying to distance you from things that were creating all the pressures in your life?
So the art helps. Really, it was my immune system going completely wonky. So I don't think anything could have, similar to the way that you hear people talking about long COVID now, I had a lot of unexplained, I would walk into a room, there'd be air conditioning on, and I've had head to toe hives, or so I just had a lot of really weird things where my body was attacking myself. And so that wasn't, the work gave me a focus and something to distract from everything that was happening. But, the way that got better was really, getting on thyroid medication and eating an anti-inflammatory diet. And, it was like medical. And I am very careful about COVID. I do, I was Girl Scout cookie mom when I had brain fog. And if anybody's ordered Girl Scout cookies, they know like how simple the thing is. And I, like just even working through that seemed like I couldn't make sense of, my brain had left the building, and there's no part of me that wants any part of living like it's no way to live. So if I can give anybody one piece of advice is like, protect your brain.
All right. Well, we have a number of comments in the chat, just people so impressed by your work and your presentation. And I appreciate you so much spending the time with us today, Kari.
Oh,
thank you.
And again, like if you visit my website, there's more on the different series, and you're welcome to learn more about it or reach out if you have questions.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but everyone can stay on and unmute yourself to say hello to Kari directly. Thanks, Kari.
Thank you.